We want to encourage everyone to take as much responsibility as possible at the most local level possible, right? So take responsibility for yourself until you're good enough at that so you can take responsibility maybe for a wife. And then if you're good enough at that, maybe you can extend that to some kids. And then maybe you can serve your local community. And then maybe you can serve your state. And maybe if you really get good at it, you could serve your nation, right? But you're taking the responsibility. And here's the basic rule. All the responsibility you abdicate will be taken up by tyrants. That's the cardinal rule of social organization. We want to help put forward a vision that's enticing and inviting. It's like, imagine you could have the world you wanted. You know, none of this Malthusian limits to growth nonsense. We get our act together. Everyone can have it, can have enough. And maybe more than enough. There'll be enough educational opportunity for everyone. No one will be scrabbling away in the dirt, burning dung, poisoning themselves. Enough food for everyone. There's also an idea in Exodus, and this is a very good idea, that if people organize themselves properly, so they're oriented on a transcendent axis and they're oriented towards their fellow man. So you serve what's highest and you also abide by the principle of reciprocity in relationship to other people. If we organize ourselves in that manner, there's no limit to the abundance the natural world can produce. That's the actual generator of genuine wealth, sustainable wealth, you know, that balances order and chaos properly, that balances nature and culture properly. So the core idea is something like, you get the hierarchy of social organization right, it generates unlimited wealth. The question that you put forward in your life is something like, what spirit should guide you as you move ahead? And you might say, well, I don't need a spirit to guide me. It's like, yeah, you don't have that option. It's like some spirit is going to guide you. That's life. The question is, what is the highest spirit that could guide you? So in the Exodus story, the proposition of the story is the highest spirit that could guide you is the spirit that objects to tyranny and that calls the enslaved to freedom. And that's the representation of God in Exodus. So that's what God is in the Exodus story. Now that's not all that God is in the biblical stories, but that's God in the Exodus story. And so that is the God that, if you abide by that God, then you believe that tyranny is implicitly wrong, even if you tyrannize yourself, and that there's something implicitly virtuous about striving for freedom, especially if you're enslaved. God is the spirit that punishes you if you make poor sacrifices. You say, well, what does that mean? It's like, well, are you giving it your all or not? Or are you playing both sides of the fence? Are you just, you know, chipping in when you have to and trying to go along for a free ride? And that's what happens with Cain. He gets all bitter about it because his sacrifices are rejected. So God is the spirit that rejects false sacrifices.
There's a thing that men need. They need difficult tasks, and they need to know that they can overcome difficult tasks. And through that, you develop your human potential. You develop what you're capable of doing. And if you don't encounter those things in life, you remain feeble and very, not just immature, but insecure.
Well, and not just insecure, but insecure, then bitter, then resentful, then dangerous. Right. Yeah. The alternative, like weak, insecure, bitter men are not harmless.
No.
Quite the contrary.
And they try to damage people.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and they try to damage people oftentimes because in comparison to those people they're trying to damage, they feel they come up short. They don't like it. They don't like the feeling, and they try to destroy the thing that makes them feel bad.
That's Cain and Abel.
Yeah.
You know, and it's so interesting because in the biblical story, that's the first story about human beings, right? Because Adam and Eve are made by God. They don't count. The first two human beings are fratricidal brothers engaged in a war of envy that degenerates into the flood and the Tower of Babel. It's stunning. Part of the endeavor is to help everyone reveal what's extraordinary within them.
Yes.
Like that's there in everyone.
Yes.
The job is to call it out. And I've seen like, I've seen extraordinary people in the worst possible circumstances. You know, people who are laboring under lives that were so bloody dreadful that it would take you a year just to describe it, who were still doing everything they could to aim up. You know,
Right.
Poor people, psychotic people, alcoholic relatives,
Yes.
devastated community, ill, like brutalized, horrible childhood, no friends,
Yes.
you know, and still looking around to see if they can find something good to do.
And you would never wish those circumstances upon anyone, because most people don't survive them.
Yeah.
But a few people get through those with incredible character.
Yeah, that's for sure.
I mean, if you are a person that, you know, strives to work hard and accomplish things and you have grand ambitions, you will find so many people that try to destroy that. It's incredible how through that adversity you create this extraordinary person.
Yeah.
And that extraordinary person could be a great light to so many other people that are going through terrible times and define themselves by the terrible circumstances that they find themselves in, which is a real problem with people.
Yeah, well, that's part of that victim narrative.
Yeah. I often think that this thing made itself.
Yeah.
As bizarre as that sounds.
Well, okay, yes and no, eh? It made itself in some way, but you followed the golden thread of what was meaningful and interesting, you know? And that is a spirit. That's the golden thread that leads you out of the maze, you know? And you'll be conducting a podcast and something will grip you. You think, oh, there's something there. And then maybe if you're awake and aware, then you start doing more of that, you know? And that has a life. So that's what happens in the story of Exodus when Moses encounters the burning bush. Because it's a bush, eh? It's not an oak tree that's 300 feet tall.
Right.
It's just a bush. And so the story goes, Moses is walking along and something catches his eye. He didn't have to go over and look. It catches his eye and he thinks, what the hell's that? And then he goes over and he starts to pay attention. And the more he pays attention, the more the voice of God manifests itself to him. That's what that story means, is, you know, so something catches your interest and glimmers, then that's the gold beckoning in the distance. It captures your interest, and then if you pursue that, like, it leads you into the depths. Let's say you want to be a whistleblower, you want to say something that's going to get you in trouble at work, so you want to do it anonymously. It's like, maybe you're shirking your responsibility, because maybe you have a responsibility, you know, and I could be persuaded alternatively, but maybe you have a responsibility, if you have something to say it in your own voice and to put yourself behind it. You know, and maybe you're taking the easy way out by not doing that. And, you know, I don't want to say that about every single person who posts anonymously, but, you know, tyranny emerges when normal, honest people are now afraid to say what they think. And when the tyranny is complete, in a totalitarian state, no one ever says what they think about anything. Everyone lies all the time. And I see part of the pathway to that, the unwillingness of ordinary people to take the consequences of their truthful speech. You know, and I also think that's detrimental to them, because I think that you find the adventure in your life. I think this is certainly true of you. You find the adventure in your life by standing behind your words. Like, that's you, right? Those are your words. If you're telling the truth, that's actually you. And there's going to be consequences. And sometimes they're going to be negative. But do you really think that the consequences of telling the truth in your own voice are negative? You think the world's structured like that? Jesus, that's a dismal view, man. When I was working as a clinician, I had lots of clients who were in that position. You know, they're at work and they're being tyrannized by sometimes it was DEI types, and sometimes it was
DEI?
diversity, inclusivity, and equity.
Oh.
You know, the woke ideologues who are coming for them and not letting them say what they wanted to say politically. And sometimes they're just being tyrannized by garden variety narcissists. You know, their bosses were that sort.
Yeah.
And it was crushing them. And, you know, it's easy to say to people like that, well, just stand up to your boss. But they often were rather constrained in their employment opportunities, and they had families. And so you can't tell people, well, just go shoot off your mouth stupidly, get fired and taken out and mobbed and let your family starve. That's a pretty dumb strategy. But what we would always do in the therapeutic endeavor with someone in a situation like that was to situate themselves in their life so that they could afford to abide by their own truth. And so that might mean if you're in a job, let's say, where you don't have freedom of expression, you know, you get your resume or your CV polished up so that if necessary you could make a lateral move relatively quickly. Maybe you send out some job applications just to test the market, and if you're not marketable, maybe you pop up your skills. And then maybe if you're in a position where you're vulnerable because someone else has got control over your tongue, maybe you work real hard to put some other ground under your feet so that you can't be taken out so easily. You know, like when I opposed the Bill C-16 in Canada, the mandatory pronoun bill, like I knew, first of all, I knew that that would cause a psychological epidemic. But I also had set myself up, you know, because I had 3 streams of income. I had my university salary, I had a clinical practice, and I had a business. And that wasn't accidental. You know, I knew from my clinical practice that if you wanted to say what you had to say, you had to put yourself in a position where you couldn't be easily taken out by the mob or the tyrant. And then I would say, well, if you're not in a position where you can afford to say what you have to say, then that's an indication that you haven't positioned yourself optimally existentially, you haven't positioned yourself optimally in life. Your foundation is too weak. And so, you know, maybe it'll take you 3 years to fix that, you know, so that now you're grounded firmly so that a casual objection from your boss or even being fired isn't going to take you out. It's not like that's easy. But I mean, abiding by the truth isn't easy. The only thing, but it's a lot more preferable than abiding by falsehood. That's the problem, right? Of course, abiding by the truth isn't easy, obviously. But, you know, what sort of devil do you let into your head if you abide by falsehood? And some of that might be just not saying what you have to say. And that's not just, you know. Mostly we regard sins of commission as more egregious than sins of omission. You know, an outright lie is worse than just failure to say what you know to be the truth. But when enough people are silent about things they know they have something to say about, then you have a tyranny. And so, well, we haven't sorted through all this, you know, very well in our society, but I think it's morally incumbent on all of us to set up our lives so that we can afford to tell the truth. And if you can't, well, then you think, no, you haven't got the hatches battened down, right? The walls of your towers, your fort aren't high enough. You're not properly armed. And you should be, because you know the mob's coming for you. And so is the chaos of nature. And you bloody well better be prepared. And so I think if you're anonymous, you're depriving yourself of the necessity to put yourself in a position where you can tell the truth. Now, think about what happened to you. Now, you tell me what you think about this. I mean, I've been watching you for a long time, and it's quite remarkable seeing the impact that you've had that keeps increasing across time. You know, but my experience with you is that, you know, you have your opinions, your perspective, and you'll put them forward. But mostly what you do is you ask people questions that you actually have as questions, right? As far as I can tell, you're mostly trying to figure out what the hell's going on. And so that's honest. It's honest exposition. It honestly exposes your own ignorance as well. And, you know, you can take the audience along as a consequence of that. And for you, the consequence has been, you know, you've gone from just doing this podcast, sort of a side thing for you, at least when it started, to being, I don't know if there's anybody who has more impact as a single individual on the media environment worldwide than you do. And that's all a consequence of actually truthfully admitting your own ignorance and saying what you had to say. And I know you were set up to do that because you had multiple streams of income, you know, and you couldn't easily be taken out. You'd already accomplished things in a multitude of spheres. But think of the consequence of that. Think, well, would that happen to anybody who did everything they could to ask stupid questions and tell the truth? The answer is maybe. You know, so you don't do that, you hide, and you have your reasons. You know, your family's at risk. It's like, fair enough, man, but you deprive yourself of the great adventure of your life, and you contribute by remaining silent to pathologization of the whole society. So, well, that doesn't seem like a very good route to me.